Okay, I'm going to continue with reading of NLP at Work, the third edition. And I've paused in these recordings for a while because my voice just didn't hold out anyway. So I'm going to do the introduction to the Neuro section, and if I can get through it, part 2, which is thinking patterns. Okay. So at the beginning of, I think, most chapters, I've got a quote, and they're very significant to me, the quotes that I use. They're often spiritual quotes. They kind of act as a stepping stone into what I'm going to say. So finding the right quotes is very important to me. Some of those have been changed in the 4th edition. Anyway, I'm going to do it as it is in the 3rd edition. So here we go. So Neuro. The spiritual life is a life beyond moods. It's a life in which we choose joy and do not allow ourselves to become victims of passing feelings of happiness or depression. And that's a quote by Henry J.M. Newen in The Road to Daybreak. Okay, so this short intro to the Neuro section. We can't change other people, we can only change ourselves. I mean, that's a really fundamental piece that I emphasize in all the trainings. Often people come wanting to change other people. And we can influence other people, but we can only absolutely change ourselves. Even that could be a challenge. Our environment is tempered by our mental models. There are some people who only see good in others. They have no representation for bad. In their world, bad doesn't exist. I have to say those people are few and far between, but nevertheless, I do know somebody like that. Our thoughts leak out in everything we do, often in ways that are outside our conscious awareness. These thoughts send out signals to the world about what we want, what we believe, and who we are. And the world responds to those signals. Consequently, the key to influencing the responses is to change the inner signals. So this is about learning to manage your mind. NLP offers us the opportunity to manage these inner representations and signals. In doing so, we begin to tap into the potential of the world's most powerful computer, our mind. By learning how to change our thoughts, we can, and there's a list, change our experience of situations and people, influence the reactions that we get, hold memories in a way that supports the way that we want to be, create the future that we want. I think more importantly, I'd say just create the present. I'll put less emphasis on the future these days. Build the relationships that we really wish, and discover the thinking that releases our unique excellence. That list's only for starters. We can learn to manage our mind in ways that work for us and help us live the life that we're meant to live, that we want to live. And so I finish with a story. In this case, it's a very short story, very short quote from a book. At the tip of Argentina is a region named Tierra del Fuego, which means land of fire. And it was named that by Magellan's explorers who noticed fires burning on the shore. The natives tending the fires, however, paid no attention to the great ships as they sailed through the straits. Later, they explained that they had considered the ships an apparition because they were so different from anything they'd seen before. The natives lacked the experience, even the imagination, to decode the evidence that was passing right before their eyes. So that's by Philip Yancey in a book called Rumours of Another World. Okay, so this is a first main chapter on thinking patterns. And the quote at the beginning of this: our achievements of today are but the sum total of our thoughts of yesterday. We are today where the thoughts of yesterday have brought us, and will be tomorrow. And we will be tomorrow where the thoughts of today take us. Blaise Pascal. So the structure of excellence exists to a large degree in how we think. What we think influences how we act. So learning to identify how our thinking is shaping our actions enables us to capture and reproduce moments of excellence. Learning to recognize how we think gives us the ability to reproduce not only others' talents, but our own. With the awareness that we can develop with NLP, we turn what might have seemed like luck into choreographed success. Learning how we think enables us to understand and relate to the many different cultures with which we come into contact. Most of the teams that I work with, I consult with, are multicultural. And even when team members originate from the same country and speak the same language, each person still has their own unique language and personal culture. We can learn to recognize, respect, accept, and relate to these unique styles, and in so doing, navigate our way successfully through the diversities of the global network of which we are a part. Often people ask me, does NLP work in other cultures? Well, it enables us to understand other cultures. It enables us to connect with them and to discover the nuances of the overall culture and the individuals within it. So it's absolutely lends itself to that. So by exploring the structure of how we think and how others think and act, we can begin to understand the subtleties of these different cultures. We can do this as we encounter them. We don't need to research for months in advance. The value of learning NLP is that we use it in real time. The connections we make and the way we represent memories, ideas, and information are unique to each one of us. Everybody's got their own way of thinking. When we understand the nature of our representations, we begin to influence our thinking, our emotions, and consequently our experience. What we think is what we are. We take in information through all of the senses of sight, hearing, touch, taste, and smell. We represent this information in our mind as a combination of sensory systems and inner feelings. These thinking patterns are a part of how we code our experience, so like programming code. By learning to manage our thoughts, we learn how to create the life and the career that we want for ourselves. Life is literally what we make it. So, preferences in thinking patterns. Let's explore some of the differences in thinking patterns. If you think of coffee, what comes to mind? Is it a picture? Maybe you imagined coffee cups and a coffee maker. Be careful, I get tempted to go make a coffee in a minute. Or maybe you heard the hiss of a coffee machine or the noise of the coffee being poured into the cup. Then again, maybe it was more of a feeling. The feel of the coffee cup perhaps, or the feeling of relief you associate with your morning coffee break, or the taste, the aroma of the coffee. Perhaps it was a combination or some or all of those. I'm getting all of them at the minute, so I'm remembering my coffee this morning. These different ways of thinking are visual. We think in pictures. We represent ideas, memory, and imagination as mental images. So for example, if you saw a picture of a cup of coffee, if you pictured a cup of coffee, I should say. Auditory, we think in sounds. These sounds could be voices or noises. For example, the sound of a coffee machine. Feelings, we represent thoughts as feelings, either internal emotions or the thought of a physical touch. We can include taste and smell in this category. And the taste of coffee, for example, or the aroma. You find that you've got a preference for one system, for some systems over others. Nobody is exclusively one thing. There's no such thing as a visual person or an auditory person, which I often hear people say. We have preferences, it's different balances. So we have differences both in the way we think and in the way we communicate. When we're relating to the world at large, a variety of people, it helps if we appeal to all of the senses. In this way, we connect with all the preferences of our readers, our listeners, our viewers, and our potential clients. At the time of writing this book, there's a backlash against some e-business propositions. I can't remember what those were. And yet there was also a boom in interest in what was called clicks and mortar businesses. These are, and yet interestingly, because I'm reading this in the middle of the lockdown, when not everything, but so much is moved to e-business. So there are established high street businesses, which are the mortar, that have developed ways of attracting people to their premises through the web, which is the mouse clicks. And given what we know about our need to appeal to all senses, that's not surprising, because the combination of the technology with a physical outlet does appeal to many people, to both our intellectual and our physical needs. So it's more likely, or it used to be more likely, that people would search for what they want on the web, but then maybe follow through with a visit to a store where they can see, hold, touch, and talk through the items they want to buy. I think that balance is changing a lot now to just buying online and being able to return things. So is it any surprise that communication is one of the most widely spoken about problems in business? Consider the level of frustration that so many people express with the meetings they attend. Even when an objective is agreed, it's likely that each person at the meeting will represent a successful conclusion and in different way. So, for example, the outcomes could include, if it's a visual way, an image of all the agreed proposals written up on a whiteboard with names against each one, or on a screen of some kind. If it's an auditory preference, it would be people talking to each other at the close of the meeting, making comments such as, "That's been really useful. I know exactly what I've got to do next." And if somebody has a feelings preference, it will be they may have thoughts about shaking hands with other people at the end of the meeting and a satisfied, warm feeling. So they'll have different outcomes or preference for different outcomes depending on their preferred systems. Okay, so a friend of mine got a new car with a satellite navigation system. We could choose the style of the display. It's actually my husband. I'll talk about him anyway. And so my ex-husband. So my husband selected the smallest scale map that could be displayed with symbolic indicators for which way to turn. And he chose that in preference to a pictorial map. Whereas my preference being very visual, I chose the pictorial map with the largest scale possible. So when traveling through France, I liked to see where we were in the context of the whole country, whereas he liked to see the details and the names of the immediate vicinity. Quite a few differences between us. Anyway, what is significant is that the makers had the wisdom to offer that choice. The ability to offer choice has become a key differentiator in business. We can choose the layout of our home on a web page, the color of the displays. We can choose how we want orders sent to us in the post. We can choose what extras we want to pay for when we book travel tickets. So to do this, we need to understand the way our customers think. And even if they themselves don't consciously know, and they often don't, this awareness of unconscious need is becoming more important than the information that we gain from standard customer surveys. We don't know what we don't know. We need to be able to offer choices that our customers only realize that are important to them as they experience a difference. So a clue to the way we think is in how we move our eyes. I mean, this has kind of become one of the well-known aspects of NLP, sometimes a controversial one. I mean, it's just one little element. For example, it's somebody near you now who considers themselves to be a good speller, even if they're not, you could still ask them to spell the word phenomenon without writing it down, and watch their eyes as they do it. They might think you're a bit weird. You might want to explain why you're doing this. If they're really skilled, ask them to spell phenomenon backwards. So good spellers will typically look up, eyes to the right or left, to see the word in their mind's eye, typically. Some people might look straight ahead in a defocused kind of a way, like they're looking through you, because they can see the word written out. They have no difficulty in spelling it either way, forwards or backwards. It's as if it's on the page in front of them, and in a way it is. So did your school teacher ever say to you, you won't find the answer on the ceiling? And the truth is, if you were visual in your thinking, you probably would. Your eyes are an indication of how you're thinking. I've come across managers who, when interviewing candidates for a job, they've been suspicious of people who break eye contact. But that's how people think. And the implication for those managers was they might have very likely recruited people who don't think a lot. So there are details of the eye movements in a diagram in the book. Anyway, I'll think about a way of showing that. And within each of the main thinking patterns of visual, auditory, and feelings, there are finer distinctions. So, for example, the colour and clarity of an image, the tone and volume of a sound, the strength and the location of a feeling. So people who can influence their emotions and their experience have the ability to choose these fine distinctions in their thinking. So they tend to be able to change those distinctions and therefore change their experience. Learning to exercise and extend your range of thinking patterns leads to, and it is a form of mental agility, just as physical exercise leads to bodily flexibility. So here's an example. You imagine you return home and you walk into the kitchen area. The working surfaces are clean and white. On one surface is a blue ceramic bowl filled with fruit, vivid green apples, purple grapes, and several bright yellow lemons. You pick up one of the lemons and you feel its textured surface with your fingertips. Raise it to your nose and you smell the aroma on the skin. Also on the surface is a sharp kitchen knife and a wooden chopping board. You put the lemon on the board and slice through the middle of it. There's a fine mist of lemon juice spraying into the air. You pick up one half of the lemon and you can see the defined segments and pips. Some of them are cut through. Raise this half to your mouth and that sharp aroma is even stronger. Sink your teeth into the skin. So how is the saliva flow in your mouth now? It's in mine. This is the power of thought. The way you think affects your internal state, which in turn triggers a physical reaction. In this case, the saliva flow. Your mind doesn't distinguish between what's imagined and what's real. So for example, I think this was about somebody I worked with at one time. Jim often had to give presentations as part of his work. And although he felt comfortable in one-to-one meetings, whenever he had to present to groups of half a dozen or more, he felt anxious, tense, and nervous. It was worse if he knew about the presentation several days in advance because he'd start to imagine what could go wrong. And in particular, he would imagine a dark room and the faces of the people that he imagined there would be blurred. He would typically start telling himself in a harsh, critical internal voice about the problems that he might have in doing the presentation. For example, he told himself he wouldn't be able to explain his points clearly, that he'd lose his place in his notes, and that people would probably get bored. And if he did hear himself speaking, it would be in almost a whisper. He could see people straining forward to hear or sitting back and looking away. He would feel a heavy, sick feeling in his stomach, as you would if you thought that. And his heart began to beat faster. His mouth felt dry. Beads of perspiration would break out in his forehead and his hands. And that was even before going to the presentation. So we dry run our lives and our minds to such an extent that we influence the eventual result. Our lives are self-fulfilling prophecies. We are what we think. So managing this thinking process, because that's going to be, that is the key. Think about something you did last week. Now think of something you could have done last week but didn't. The question is, how do you know that you did one and not the other? Because after all, they're only memories. One's remembered and one's created. So how often have you had the experience of not knowing for sure whether you did something or not? You know, did I lock the front door? Did I turn off the light? And you're not sure. Think of something you did yesterday that you'll do in an identical way tomorrow. So it might be getting out of bed, it might be brushing your teeth or setting the alarm. So how do you distinguish between the one that you did yesterday and the one you're going to do tomorrow? How do you know which is which, basically? In fact, can you distinguish between what you did yesterday and what you'll do tomorrow? So sometimes people distinguish between the past and the future according to where they position the images in their mind. And so, for example, the past might be behind you or to one side, to your left. And the future for some people is in front of them or to their right. That's just an example. Do you know where you hold images or where you hold the representation of your past and then your future? And where's the present? So we're going to explore a lot more about that and how we code time in a later chapter. So identify two people, one you like and admire and one you dislike. Now take the one that you like and admire, and in your thinking about, as you think about this person, are you seeing them? And what's the quality of the image? You know, is it bright? Is it hazy? Is it color? Is it black and white? Is it a moving image or is it still? And are there sounds associated with that? And if so, what are the quality of the sounds? Are they loud or faint? Are they harsh or soft? And what's the location of the sounds? Like where do you hear that? And what about the feelings? What exactly do you feel and experience? And where do you feel it? Where in you, for example, do you feel that? So now think of the person you dislike and consider the same questions about how you see them, how you hear them, how you feel them. And compare the two. So what is similar in the quality of your thinking about the two, and what's different? The content's irrelevant. It's about the way that we represent these things. It's the nature of your thinking that makes the difference. This is really important. It's about how we do what we do. It's not what we do. It's not the content. It's about how we do it. So this ability to distinguish between the various aspects of your own and other people's experience is a way of determining the difference that makes a difference between those who do achieve what's important to them and those who don't. So just to consider those distinctions, I gave some examples in more detail. And experimenting with them. So, for example, think about a journey that you've taken recently. It could have been a journey to work, although many people work at home. So the journey might have been from your bedroom to your office, or you can change your experience of the journey to make it better or worse by experimenting with your thinking about it. And so start by changing some of the visual distinctions. So, for example, if it's dim, turn up the brightness. And then put it back if it was dim in the first place. Put it back. That way you'll be able to work out which distinctions make the difference. So for example, so do this with each of them. So with brightness, bright or dim, dull or sparkly. Whatever it is, change it. Find out what effect that has and put it back. Same with each of these. So clarity, you might want to write these down to do this. Dim and hazy, or sharp and in focus. Okay. Whatever it is, change it, put it back. And some of these may not apply at all. You might not be seeing anything. If it's size, is it larger than life, life size, or smaller than life? Color or black and white? Is it full color? Is it shades of gray, partial color, black and white, or black and white? I'll go through the whole list, and you can either pause as you make the changes or pause, write down the list and pause at the end and experiment with this. Location, is it in front of you, to one side, or behind you? Distance, is it close to or is it distant? Motion, are they still snapshots or are they movies? Speed, is that, if it's moving, is it fast or is it slow? Framed or panoramic? So is your image enclosed in a frame or is it panoramic? Or what? Sequence, are you seeing an order of images or are you seeing random images? And associated, dissociated, are you seeing it as if it's out of your own eyes, like you're in your own body, associated, or can you see yourself in the picture as well, like you're seeing yourself with the other in a dissociated way? You might find initially you're not aware of any pictures in your thinking. That's not unusual. But if that's the case, do the exercise with your eyes closed and allow yourself to become aware of what you do notice. Okay? Same with the, so you might want to pause there and experiment with that. So I'm going to do the same with the auditory distinctions. I'll give you the list and then you can experiment. So take another memory, for example, your last, let's say, disagreement that you had, and experiment with the auditory distinctions. So for example, if you can recall voices, make them soft and whispery. Now give them a different accent, make them loud and boomy, and always return to the original way that you think about it before experimenting with the next distinction. Otherwise, you won't know which one's making the difference. And so with volume, it could be loud or quiet, speed, fast or slow. Location, is it in front of you, to one side, behind you? What's the location of the sound? Distance, is the sound close to or is it far away? Voice and sound, is it a voice or can you hear other sounds? If it is a voice, whose voice is it and what tone is it? I mean, it might be you're seeing somebody, but it's not their voice that you're hearing. Pitch, high, low, or mid-range. Continuous, is the sound continuous or intermittent? So note how this experiment affects the quality of the memory. What starts as an unpleasant memory, maybe, can become an amusing one by changing some of these distinctions. Like some people change the nature of the voices. They might give somebody the voice of a cartoon character, for example, such as Bugs Bunny. What happens if you do that? So the feelings distinctions, now think of a time when you felt happy. What does happy feel like to you? And where in you, in your body, do you experience that? So experiment again, this time with the intensity of the feeling. Can you turn it up? Can you turn it down? I tend to find that the feelings come as a consequence of the way that we represent the visual and the auditory. However, you might be able to influence the feelings directly. So as you change it, you know, for example, if you turn up the intensity of the feeling or turn it down, then return the feeling to its original state. Change the pace of the feeling and again, continue to experiment with each element, returning it to its original state before you experiment with the next one. So these are some of the elements. Pressure. What sort of pressure do you feel? Is there a sense of being pushed, a general or a specific pressure? Location. Where in your body do you experience any sensations? Motion. Is there a movement to the feeling? Is it fluttery? Is it steady? Is it intermittent? Tingling? Temperature. Is it hot, cold, damp? Intensity, strong or weak? And pace. Is it a fast feeling or a slow one? Okay, so either listen to those again and experiment with them to find out what happens. So you'll find in each case there'll probably be one or two key distinctions for you, that by changing those distinctions you affect the quality of your experience. So Jim experimented, so the guy I was referring to earlier, he experimented with his thinking about presentations. First thinking about one-to-one meetings in which he felt confident and relaxed. He discovered that the key distinctions for him were brightness, focus, and the tone of voice with which he spoke to himself. By bringing the quality of his thinking about presentations into line with his thinking about one-to-one meetings, and by making the image bright and in focus, and by softening his internal voice tone, he noticed that he felt a steady rippling feeling in his chest. It was the same feeling he experienced in one-to-one meetings, which went well. And this was the feeling that he associated with confidence. So there are some general trends in the distinctions associated with feelings of confidence, happiness, and certainty. And not surprisingly, there are expressions in everyday language that reflect this. For example, you know, we say people say the future's looking brighter, or the future looks black. That's becoming clearer, or it's a bit hazy. Or we had a rough ride in that discussion, or that went smoothly. The richness of our internal thinking leaks through into our communication and into the way we influence ourselves and others. So as we enrich our thinking, we enrich our experience, we enrich our life. So in summary, once we've experienced something, it becomes a memory. And when we react to a memory, we are reacting not to the direct experience, but to the way we store that memory in our mind. So we're responding to our representations in life all the time. Managing the distinctions in our thinking gives us the ability to influence and change the nature of our memories so that we can store them in a way that results in us feeling the way we want to feel. Many people develop the habit of storing memories in a way that leads to depression, anger, or other negative feelings. And my point is, why choose those when you could choose pleasure or peace? The same is true for the future. Why make yourself worried or frustrated about an event that hasn't occurred when you could be making yourself confident and comfortable? You might choose to keep some of the worry in the form of concern. The point is that you choose the state rather than it choosing you. Our ability to manage our state is more and more important in a world that defies control and seems to be increasingly chaotic. Or maybe that's just my thinking. You can be sure that you already use distinctions in your thinking patterns in this way. Whenever you change your experience of something, you are almost certain to have reprogrammed the way you think about it, even though you may not have realized that that's what you were doing. So there's one technique is a shortcut to managing your thinking. So it's called a swish. It's a technique for utilizing these distinctions in thinking to replace a problem state with a desirable state. It's fast, kind of as the name suggests, swish, and powerful, as well as being great for dealing with unwanted behavioral habits. It won't necessarily be appropriate for deep, significant issues. There's other techniques, and techniques are the output of NLP, remember. These are processes that we've discovered that people who can achieve these results that they use. It's a result of modeling, so they are the output of NLP. So to use this swish technique, first identify the response in yourself that you want to change. So maybe there's a particular reaction that you have to certain things, a repeated reaction. So for example, you might want to change a state such as anxiety or apprehension. So identify precisely what it is that triggers that response. There'll be something specific that immediately precedes your reaction. So identifying this trigger is a key part of the process. So if, for example, it's a response to the way in which somebody speaks to you, identify what it is they say or what it is about the way they say that triggers your reaction. Recreate this in your thinking in exactly the way it happens. If it's the way in which somebody speaks to you, then hear them saying the words in exactly the way they do. If it is the sight of an audience in front of you, imagine yourself in that situation, looking out at the audience in the way you do. See exactly what you would see if you were there. I was watching a program last night about celebrities going through some of the SAS, which is the elite force, commando force. And there was one of the guys there who had been a boxer, and they wanted people to learn how to not just be able to fight, but also to not fight, not respond to aggression. And this guy could barely manage that. So there was something in the way that people were lashing out at him, which they were asked to do to see what his response was. And in that particular kind of lashing out and hitting, as it happened, he could barely contain. And in fact, he did lash out. And one of the things he wanted to be able to do is to be able to control that aggression. He said he was already always on the point of being about to explode. So now determine which facets of the way you think about this trigger have the greatest effect. There'll be some elements that intensify your reaction. The swish lends itself most readily to visual triggers. Often the size and the brightness of the image have the greatest impact. So for example, if it's a sight of a certain person who works for you that triggers a response, experiment with each distinction in turn, putting the image back the way it was before you experiment with the next one. The aim is to find the one or two that intensify the response, although these elements are currently triggering the response that you don't want. The aim of the swish is to hook these elements to the response that you do want. In so doing, you're making your own resources work for you rather than against you. Then think about something completely different to break your state. For example, what colour was the front door of the last house in which you lived? Now imagine the person you'd like to be, irrespective of what you've been in the past and irrespective of any specific behaviour. This is an opportunity to imagine how you would like to be, the sort of qualities you'd really like to have, and the style that fits with who you truly are. Imagine this as if you are looking at yourself as an observer, dissociated. And develop this until you have an image that's compelling and desirable. Just check that that fits with you and with the significant people in your life. It needs to be a real benefit for them too, for you to be this way. So explore how it fits with whatever sense of purpose that you have, with your beliefs and values, with every aspect that's important to you. Check that this new you meets any needs that you have, that you've been satisfying in less healthy ways in the past. So for example, you've been getting attention for being stressed. Check that you're going to get the level and quality of attention you need from this new way of being in the world. Now, break state again. Think of something completely different so you kind of wipe the slate clean. Now make an image of the trigger, the stimulus that prompts this response that you want to change. So use the key factors that enhance the trigger. So maybe it's the size and the brightness. So make it bright and make it big. Take the image of the new you and make it small and dark. Place this small dark image in the corner of the bigger image. It's like screw it up as if it's a piece of paper, for example. And very quickly make the large image small and dark, and at the same time make the small image large and bright. So do this as fast as you can. The speed's important. You make a sound to accompany this movement, like a swish. So you're going to swap one over with the other. You're going to replace one with the other. You choose a sound that works for you. So the sound can become the association for the feelings of becoming the new you. You're giving the desirable you the qualities that you had been giving to the undesirable you. Break state again. So clear the images. That break state's important. Clear the images so that you start afresh. Create a new image so you break the image before you start again. Otherwise you've maybe got it in a loop. Repeat the process however many times it takes for it to work. I suggest here 5 times. You'll know it when you either experience or imagine the trigger for the original state and your response to it is changed to what you want it to be. So you swish into the new you immediately. It's like you've got into the habit of overwriting the undesirable you with the desirable you. And you keep doing that until that works for you. So there we are. Et voila, as we say in France. So the thought provokers. What sort of jobs do you think would best suit people whose thinking preference is A, visual, B, auditory, C, feelings? 2, think of a successful outcome of a regular meeting that you hold or attend. How do you think about it? Is it a picture? Do you hear sounds or conversation? Do you experience certain feelings? A combination of those things. Look at a website that appeals to you. Which senses does it employ that capture your attention? Think of a part of your work that you really enjoy, and now think of a part that you enjoy less well. How do the distinctions in your thinking vary? Think of someone with whom you have a really good relationship. Now think of someone you find it difficult to deal with. Compare the differences in your thinking about each person. What are the main distinctions? Now take out an email or message that you've received recently. What senses are you using as you read it? Okay. So one of the books I recommend there, Steve and Connie Ray Andrea. Steve very sadly died last year. But they're a very great source of NLP process, a lot of this very authentic in the way they present it. So one of their books is called Change Your Mind and Keep the Change. And the story at the end of this chapter, I like this story. People often remember this one particularly. It's so significant. One day, a traveller was walking along the road on his journey from one village to another, and as he walked, he noticed a monk tilling the ground in the fields beside the road. The monk said, "Good day," to the traveller, and the traveller nodded to the monk. The traveller then turned to the monk and he said, "Excuse me, do you mind if I ask you a question?" "Not at all," said the monk. "I'm travelling from the village in the mountains to the village in the valley, and I was wondering if you knew what it's like in the village in the valley." "Well, tell me," said the monk, "what was your experience of the village in the mountains?" "It was dreadful," said the traveller. "To be honest, I'm glad to be going away from there. I found the people most unwelcoming. When I first arrived, I was greeted coldly. I was never made to feel part of the village, no matter how hard I tried. The villagers kept very much to themselves, and they don't take kindly to strangers. So, tell me, what can I expect in the village in the valley?" I'm sorry to tell you," said the monk, "but I think you're going to find it much the same." The traveller hung his head and walked on. A few months later, another traveller was journeying down the same road, and he also came upon the monk. "Good day," said the traveller. "Good day," said the monk. "How are you?" said the traveller. "I'm very well," replied the monk. "Where are you going?" "I'm going to the village in the valley," replied the traveller. "Do you know what it's like?" "I do," replied the monk. "But first, tell me, where have you come from?" "I've come from the village in the mountains." "And how was that?" said the monk. "It was a wonderful experience. I would have stayed if I could, but I am committed to travelling on. I felt as though I were a member of the family in the village. The elders gave me much advice. The children laughed and joked with me, and the people generally were kind and generous. I'm really sad to have left there. It will always hold special memories for me." "And what of the village in the valley?" he asked again. "I think you'll find it much the same," replied the monk. "Good day to you." "Good day and thank you," replied the traveller, smiled and journeyed on.